Hello, and welcome to the podcast where friends discuss environmental policies from around the planet.
Hello, and welcome back from our mini break, although we did keep putting out extra policy episodes that we really hope you guys caught.
Better.
I'm joined here with my fellow co-host, Ala. Hey girl, how are you doing?
Hey, I am okay, I guess. I'm very tired and I'm a little under the weather. My research project is kicking my ass. I'm telling everybody who will listen, including everyone who listens to this podcast. Hopefully not the people I work for, but everybody else, I'm telling them.
I really hope your co-workers catch this. Anyway, so for our last episode on our extra policy, we did the Niger Delta region and their fight with show. And during that episode, Ala made a small error when she was talking about the oil-producing states in the Niger Delta region. So you want to tell them, girl?
Okay, so yes, I'm very embarrassed by this era because I'm from the region, but it's not my fault. It's been restructured so many times. Okay, it's kind of my fault. Point is, I said the top two oil states in the country, in the region were River State and Bayelsa, but actually Akwa Ibom is number one. Shout out to all my Akwa Ibom friends. Sorry for that. I did not mean to exclude you. And of course, I totally forgot about Delta in the name Niger Delta. Very important. And then we have, of course, River State and Bayelsa. After some restructuring of the oil wells, Abia is number 5. So I wanted to include them as well. Please don't come for me, Nigerians. I love you, my Niger people. Please, I beg you.
Come for her. Anyway, so from our previous episodes, we've gotten some great feedback from you guys, and we had an audience question that was asked by Mavis from Papua New Guinea. So they asked, what do you guys think make an effective mangrove management policy? So I'm just going to give you a little bit of my 2 cents on this. So of course, for any climate change policy, we know that we need to have the engagement of civil society in the decision-making process and make sure that we use right-based approaches. Now, the problem with mangrove is that since it's a broad term for plantation that are all around the coastal line, it isn't exactly the easiest to manage because mangroves include a vast range of combinations of tidal regimes. They have climatic variations, they have species compositions, and obviously physical, chemical, and microbiological compositions of soils and water that also differ, which coincidentally results in widely varying growth. We have different reproduction and productivity rates from these plantations. Therefore, the way that mangroves are used and managed, they must take into account these constraints that we have, also bearing in mind the socioeconomic needs of local people.
Sure.
Ala, what do you think?
I mean, it's like you said, it's very vast, it's very varying, and I guess, in my opinion, the biggest thing to remember is that mangroves exist in areas where people generally use them for their day-to-day living in more rural settings, right? They are usually taking some of the mangrove trees and using them for lodging, boats, things like that. So you have to have some sort of education aspect to any good mangrove policy where you let people know why it is important for them to conserve that area. You know what I mean? You really have to talk to the locals and come up with a way that you are replanting as stuff is being used, provide them with some other alternatives, things like that. Not to mention, there's also the fact that a lot of mangroves are lost to industrial processes like logging, exploration that leads to it being cut down. And the biggest offender is monocrop agriculture, like we see with the coconut farms destroying Brazil's mangroves, for example. So all those things should be taken into account, right? I would say, like you said, the social components are very important. And I think for me, if I was part of a team one day, guys, fingers crossed, designing an extensive mangrove policy or strategy, I would do some sort of analytical hierarchy process. And, you know, the approach you use is different, but it's just a way to rank criteria in decision making and engineering and policy. So I would do something like that, and I would take all these into effect, especially the socioeconomic aspects, to see what criteria has the biggest impact. On the science and engineering side, the biggest issue with restoring and replanting mangroves has to consider root stability. Okay, so just to take you guys a little technical for a little bit, because that's what I know, it's important to look at the sediment amount, as excess sediment accretion can lead to stress on the roots and the trees can get smothered and start to die. But you can buffer that accretion in certain areas. You also have to look at the salinity because that affects that as well. In contrast, if you have too little sediment inputs, you can deprive mangroves of the sufficient nutrients and the materials that they need in the soils that provide them the foundation to grow. So there's also, like, I think, apart from looking at the sediments and the soil, the geotechnical aspect, there's also some cool technology that's incoming with support structures for mangrove farms. So that's pretty cool. That's something that we can all look into. I'm going to put a link in the show notes that should direct you to some cool stuff being done in that space. But yeah, that's what I think.
Well, we really hope that that answers your question. Please keep throwing more at us, and we really hope that we will just keep doing justice to them.
Sure, yeah.
Today, we are talking about something that has slowly become a popular buzzword, sort of a phrase in environmental policy and the fight against climate change, which is, ta-da, blue carbon.
Woo!
Coastal ecosystems, as we know, are some of the most productive on Earth. They provide us with essential ecosystem services such as coastal protection from storms, and they also provide nursery grounds for fish. We also know that they provide another integral service, that is sequestering and storing blue carbon from the atmosphere and oceans, and that is why they are an essential piece of the solution to global climate change. Mm-hmm. It stands to reason that these major sinks for carbon should be managed properly, and that is what blue carbon policy is all about.
Yeah.
Today we are going to talk about why we need a better blue policy, the science aspects of it, and everything that part Ala knows about. Ala's going to throw some more jargon at us, but hopefully make it easier.
I'm going to do my best, guys.
And, you know, that's actually one of the reasons why I'm quite excited about this topic, because Ala, this is exactly like the last one with the Niger Delta one, and this one as well. She is very passionate about coastal restoration, and mangroves are a very integral part of it.
Yep. Not to mention, this topic comes from an Instagram contest winner. So we were so excited that we turned it from an extra policy to a full episode.
Yeah, so really thank you. That was a great topic that you suggested. So shout out to Mavis for bringing you guys this episode from us.
Yeah, thanks, Mavis.
All right, Ala, take it away, girl. Tell us what blue carbon is all about.
So like Aja said, blue carbon is carbon that is stored naturally by marine and coastal ecosystems. That's where the name comes from, because ocean, blue, that's pretty much it. It's three main things that make up these systems: mangroves, seagrass, and tidal marshes. We're going to talk about mangroves a lot in this episode, but I do want to say I am also a big fan of seagrass, and a big fan of what is happening with kelp farming. We should probably do another episode on that separately, because there's a lot to say about kelp farming. Eat seaweed, guys. All right. So the thing about the systems is about half of the blue carbon that's stored is buried beneath the ocean floor. But the seagrass, the mangroves, the salt marshes along our coast, they also capture and hold blue carbon. And so it works as sort of a carbon sink. We know that oceans are some of the biggest carbon sinks on Earth, but part of that is because of these coastal systems that we have. So they're very important. And although they're smaller than all the planet's forests put together, they do sequester carbon at a faster rate, and they can do this for millions of years. So most of the carbon that's taken up in these systems, you can't see it, but it's still there. And if we leave it alone, it can last there from centuries to millennia. That's why it's so cool.
Are there any industrial uses for this underground carbon? Like, why are we worried about if we leave it alone? Is it being harvested?
So the whole thing with this is we want to avoid continuing to release this carbon. We're not even harvesting this carbon. You can't harvest it the way you do like fossil fuel carbon, right? But because of the industrialization and urbanization of different areas, changing land use, we are clearing out these areas either for agriculture or for living reasons, or just to use the wood resources. That's what keeps happening. And you really don't want to release stored carbon that has been there for thousands of years. It greatly impacts the atmospheric carbon levels, which is what we're trying to fight with climate change. There's no good that really comes from this, apart from, I guess, yeah, you can plant more crops and you can build more cities. There's that.
And I think at this point we need to stop caring about ourselves and, like, just a little bit care about the earth, you know.
Just a little bit. Yeah, we could use that. So these coastal systems combined cover about approximately 49 million hectares in general across the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. So you have like mangroves they're like about 14 million hectares, and then you have seagrass at about anywhere from 2 to 40 million hectares, which is a very large range. I don't know where they get these numbers. And of course, you have tidal marshes at around 18. 83% of the global carbon cycle is circulated through oceans, and they cover less than 2% of the total area, ocean area, these coastal habitats. Yet they sequester so much. And they're important for more than just sequestration. They also support water quality, healthy fisheries, and they protect against floods and storms. For example, mangroves are estimated to be worth about $1.6 billion each year in ecosystem services that support coastal livelihoods and people just living near them.
They're important.
Yeah. But on a personal note, the research I do right now works on coastal dune restoration efforts, and the entire reason for our work is to help mitigate storm occurrences, like to reduce the effect that storm has on coastal regions where we work in like a beach area. This is not about me. Let's move on. So it's bigger than storing carbon. You know what I mean? You're thinking about a lot of things here: habitats, quality, reducing land loss, and flood. For example, seagrass covers less than 0.2% of the ocean floor, but it stores about 10% of the carbon buried in the oceans each year.
Damn.
I know. And the sad part is it's being lost at a rate of 1.5% per year. And we've lost about 30% of its historical global coverage. This is something that's really useful, and we're losing it.
Are we surprised?
No. No, you're not, unfortunately. Tidal marshes are being lost at a rate of 1 to 2% per year, and they cover roughly 140 million hectares of the Earth's surface. They've lost more than 50% of their historical global coverage. And mangroves, which I know are very important because we keep bringing them up, they estimate that carbon emissions from mangrove deforestation account for up to 10% of emissions from deforestation globally, because you're releasing what is stored carbon back into the air. So that's like the scientific relevance and the importance of blue carbon. So it's getting really popular because it all comes down to money, right? A lot of countries have included coastal ecosystem management in their national climate change mitigation activities, which is important. And they do this using these mechanisms like REDD, which is RDDD+, NAMAs, and NDCs. REDD is the framework through which countries, private sectors, and multilateral funds can pay other countries to not cut down their forests. It's a form of carbon credit exchange. These all are. The nationally appropriate mitigation actions, NAMAs.
Wait, hold on. You can pay somebody else to not cut down your house?
Yeah, it's actually very popular. REDs are actually how we are getting a lot of this blue carbon policy funding because of the whole loophole with deforestation. You can pay people like the carbon credit. They didn't cut down something and you want to buy that credit from them. So the idea is like you're saving the planet somewhere with the carbon credit. It's kind of like an offset, but not really. And I'm going to buy that from you because I need to do this project that's going to lose some stuff. So I'm going to make it up with what you're saving, and I'm going to pay you to do that project. Yeah. NAMA is the nationally appropriate mitigation actions. And then this one is like any action that reduces emissions in developing countries. And it's under the umbrella of a national government initiative. And it has different ways it works. While NDCs are called nationally determined contributions. And these are more like at the heart of the Paris Agreement and about long-term goals. So they support financially any efforts that are happening that will last longer than right now. The date set is 2020. So when you see people saying goals that like 2050, things like that, those usually fall under NDCs and you can trade for those. So if you're following, these are basically like financial and regulation driven incentives. And since the carbon market is still being developed, both in the US and internationally. Every country has a different system to balance the profits. Carbon taxes are already in place, embassy commitments like the Paris Climate Accords. So that means that with this new mitigation area, there's a lot of development up for grabs.
Yeah, that's actually, so is it like the same way it'll be traded? Like we have industrial carbon emissions being traded?
So it's kind of similar. The financial aspect of blue carbon, as far as what it contributes to current global carbon credits, is kind of driven, or is kind of driving a lot of change in climate policy. So it's already been used in a way that some of the blue carbon strategies and projects we're going to talk about in this episode are being funded by these programs. People are in maybe developed areas will be like, I really want to build this thing. And they'll find a place where they're saving the mangroves. And they'll be like, you know what? Here's a few $1,000s. Here's maybe $100,000. Here you go. I'll pay for your carbon credits. Things like that. The thing we have to balance is making sure that we're not at an equal situation. We want to make sure that what we're offsetting is less than what we're repairing. You know what I mean? So that's the tricky part. That's the ups and downs of the situation, which let's talk about it. So the results of trying to put a dollar value on something like blue carbon kind of affects its importance to climate change. But it's also necessary because it's driving these projects. And there's also imbalance because some countries cannot store that much carbon by their shorelines. They're just not built that way. The countries just physically are not that way. So while we account for the social cost of carbon, and it has some uncertainty that gives different costs, there has been some research that has developed a very recent method that tries to combine not just the location of the country, but also its social carbon costs and also its emissions. So it's like a US and European research joint initiative. And what they found is that blue carbon stored by all the ecosystems totaled around 81 million metric tons of carbon per year, which is roughly the greenhouse gas emissions of France.
Oh, damn. So that's a lot.
Yeah. So right now we have a situation where literally we are offsetting technically France with all our blue carbon. And we could do more. We could be doing more. And it's about 190 billion per year, according to research. And that's in dollars. Because nations with extensive coastal lines and fertile tidal zones have the most area and capability to store blue carbon, Australia ranks at the top with an eighth of the world's total blue carbon capacity, followed by the US and Indonesia. But the benefits aren't equal, right? So a poor country with less economic infrastructure is going to suffer fewer climate-related damages from additional ton of carbon in the atmosphere, meaning their social cost of carbon might be lower than a wealthy country with a lot more to lose. For example, Russia is projected to have an overall benefit from climate change as their seasons continue to expand in the far north.
I cannot wait for sea levels to rise so I can go live in fucking Russia.
Yeah, basically, like, people will be flocking there. And they don't, right now at least, they just don't put out as much as some of these other countries. So anyway, yeah, the countries that, the most generous is Australia, followed by Indonesia and Cuba. Cuba probably ranks so high thanks to the fact that the country is basically one giant coastline, and they don't have a lot of economic wealth tied to industry, so they're not putting off a lot. Countries which are poor do not have a high social cost of carbon. Scientists, not me, researchers, think that this could be the driving factor behind why Cuba is also a great donator. The biggest beneficiaries, those with the highest social cost of carbon related to their blue carbon capacity, so how much are you giving versus how much are you taking, are of course India, China, the US, I was surprised by this, Pakistan, and Japan.
I was just going to ask about Pakistan because I know that we are landlocked from three sides and we have one coastal line. So I guess that would explain this. Also, it's like one of the most populous countries out there. So like, I don't think that would help either. But, it is worth mentioning that Pakistan has been working for the sustainable management of mangroves for like a while now.
Yeah, these countries that we mentioned, they're the biggest contributors and beneficiaries for different reasons. With Pakistan, like you said, the coastal area is not huge. And while there are some mangrove programs underway, they're not all financed with the same schemes, but they're underway. There's still a huge social carbon cost in Pakistan compared to just how much space it has to offset. So when other countries close to Pakistan are storing blue carbon, technically they benefit from this. It offsets some of what they're putting out. It needs maybe a few more aggressive programs, or it needs to find ways to intensify what it has. But it's nowhere near as bad as the reason that India, China, and the US are big beneficiaries. Because here they simply have a ridiculously high carbon social costs, and the blue carbon experts are the largest. And it's funny because the US, while being a great place for carbon sinks, happens to have such a high carbon social cost with industry that it doesn't matter, and it goes from being where it could be helping to hurting. So that's the situation.
Oh, so are there any projects that you can probably think of from these countries?
Yes. The biggest project that is going on in blue carbon is called the Blue Carbon Initiative. Look it up, guys, because they have this whole document called the Blue Carbon Policy Framework, which I'm not going to get into, but it's very interesting. It outlines how they're doing this entire thing. I think for anybody who is interested in this sort of policy or science, it is a great read. I've read it, I enjoyed it, but let's talk a little bit about the initiative. So the initiative is a partnership among Conservation International, IUCN, and the IOC UNESCO. And it's an integrated program that focuses on mitigating climate change by conserving and restoring coastal marine ecosystems globally. To do this, they include like scientific working group and a policy working group, which come together and just give people ideas and recommendations. They have projects in Australia, the USA, Indonesia, Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras, and El Salvador right now, and they're hoping to expand. So let's start with Australia, who are winning, by the way, in this area. So at COP21, and that's the Conference of the Parties where they come together to discuss climate change, Australia announced the creation of the International Partnership for Blue Carbon. And they just combine like governments, nonprofits, agencies, scientists, yada, 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 to accelerate action on coastal blue carbon ecosystems. Indonesia and Australia have the first and second most blue carbon ecosystems in the world. And Indonesia's mangrove forests store up to 5 times the carbon of its upland forests. But we're talking about Australia, So in November 2017, the Australia government announced funding of $6 million to support efforts to protect and manage these blue carbon ecosystems. And they did this like throughout the Pacific in partnership with Fiji and other Pacific countries. So it's not just like Australia. They also committed to spend $300 million on climate change and resilience across these countries. And it's one of a few countries to voluntarily on their own, which this kind of blew my mind, I did not know this, report on human-induced greenhouse gas emissions and carbon sequestration associated with coastal wetlands in our national greenhouse gas inventory. Nobody forces them. They just like report all this information. It is out there. You want this information, you can go get it. Australia is like, sure, yeah, we'll tell you what we're doing. We're not ashamed. We're proud of ourselves. I don't know. They have a lot of issues, but in this area, I gotta say, like, they're winning, you guys.
Speaking of Indonesia, I know you said that the coastal plantation take up 5 times the carbon that their upland forest takes. That's really interesting because remember when we did the Borneo forest episode, we found that Indonesia has a lot of forests. So that's saying a lot.
I know, right? It really is remarkable. In fact, they have this program called the Low Carbon Development Indonesia. And what it does is it's a platform for sustainable economic and social growth through low GHG emissions. They even have this thing called Mangrove for the Future. And what they do is they invest in coastal systems conservation for like sustainable development and stuff. And so far, at least this is just up to 2016, right? They had planted 1.4 million mangroves. About 135,000 hectares of area were restored. They have 36 villages in 7 provinces involved. And they have like a total of over 30 projects that are going on right now through this grant. So it's pretty significant.
Indonesia is actually working a lot to save their small island because it is quite prone to disasters like we see.
It is. And in fact, this program was built after the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami to sort of strengthen these islands. It even extends to part of like the Papua Islands under Indonesia as well. Speaking of one of my favorite places to talk about when I mention the environment, Costa Rica, I need to visit this place. Like, I bring it up quite a lot. Conservation International is working in the Gulf of Nicoya in Costa Rica to protect the diverse mangrove ecosystems of that country. The Gulf mangroves forests provide habitat for fisheries, income for more than like 6,000 fishermen, and it's the main source of food for nearby communities. So it's really important, and they're doing all these projects around there to kind of combat the degradation that they're suffering due to like local economy. Papua New Guinea is another area to talk about through this project called Mangrove Rehabilitation for Sustainably Managed Healthy Forests. My God. Whew. Marsh. The IUCN engages the PNG government and academic institutions to build capacity and strengthen sustainable mangrove management. Because PNG's mangrove forests are second only to Indonesia in terms of species diversity, with 43 recorded species. And they're critically important for local communities and coastal ecosystems.
That's the entire country is just, it's a small island, isn't it?
Yeah, and most of it is coastal, yeah. So 2 key issues that they address in this project are to support community rehabilitation and sustainable management. Remember, we talked about how important it is to key in the community. This project tries to do that. And they also look at sustainable finance methods and models. Speaking of carbon financing methods, in Kenya, one of the biggest successes in this area is Makoko Pamoja. I think we once talked about it a little bit on our social media. So it's a mangrove restoration and reforestation project currently being implemented in Kazi Bay, Kenya. It includes 117 hectares of nationally owned mangroves with the potential to keep growing. So what they do is 80% of this community makes their living off of fishing related activities. And they used to use a lot of those mangroves to build their homes. And then they realized that their coconut trees started falling because like the mangroves support so many things, including these trees. So they just started building mangroves back, trying to support these systems. So this project is community led and it's financed by voluntary carbon credits. That's what's so cool about it. With this project, it has been successfully implemented and it just completed its first crediting period. And the revenues that come from the sale of these carbon credits are used in the project implementation and to help develop more community projects. So like they even have like more planting, more conservation, and they're hiring staff members.
That's pretty impressive. Who do they sell it to? Like, is it within the region, or do we have like big countries that are snatching up this carbon dioxide? Or is it Bill Gates?
Oh my God. Ajwa, you have really turned on Bill Gates. Anyway, the community has replanted more than 10,000 mangroves and trees, like I said, and it's actually what they do is they finance it through this thing called sea level, and what that follows is a Plan Vivo standard. So like I said, there are a lot of standards for credits, and I'm going to talk about this a little more, but how this project works is with something that we call the voluntary carbon standards, like VCS, and it's basically a way that you can get people from around the world with voluntary carbon credits. They just trade in different markets. So I believe this one is traded through Plan Vivo standard, which is a standard for payments for ecosystem services that is run by some charity in England, and it focuses on rural smallholders and communities. So that's how they get the money, and they've been able to sell $10,000 in carbon credits every year since 2013. And all of this goes back into their project. So they just keep offsetting more, and people can buy it to use it to build their projects.
Only $10,000? That's
every year. And if you convert that to like in a small rural area where what they're doing is pretty much conserving and rebuilding mangroves, and it's a community driven effort, $10,000 every year, this is 2021, since 2013, that's nothing to like that's, if you look at it in those terms, it's still significant. You know what I mean?
That's probably more than what most countries set apart for their climate policies anyway. So.
Well, I mean, yeah, and the thing is like it has absorbed about 3,000 tons of carbon. So it's carbon credit is by how much you're absorbing. So as they are able to offset more, they'll be able to sell more credits. And that brings me to the future of blue carbon. There's a lot to be said for this, and there's different ways that they work. And like I said, there's different standards and methods that you have to use for accounting. I don't want to bore you guys with this, but the important things to know is you can sell credits in a compliance market or you can sell them in a voluntary market. Credits in a compliant market they deal with like national government, industry members. They're required to like reduce their emissions under a treaty. It's tied to a treaty like the Kyoto Protocol or like the European Union's emissions trading scheme. But with the voluntary markets, they just buy credits from each other like we have in Makoko Pamoja. And it is kind of more like free than the other one, but there are still standards that set it. So the important things with this is that voluntary markets can be more accessible for community-based projects, but participants have a choice among standards and projects, and they can kind of choose what they think will be the best for their project. I guess it's more of a capital-driven situation, because sometimes compliance projects, smaller countries cannot meet those. They have like really high requirements that it's just harder for them to meet.
But you're saying like smaller countries can't do it, but we have like a small ass town in the middle of nowhere doing it.
Well, that's because Makoko Pamoja is using voluntary carbon markets. So that's the difference between the compliance and the voluntary. Compliance markets are important. The standards are stricter, and big governments can deal with that, and big companies as well. But if there weren't voluntary carbon markets, somewhere like Makoko Pamoja wouldn't be able to trade their blue carbon credits as easily. So that's kind of what drives the different ones. And of course, we talked about the RED program, which is another way they can do that. And the NDCs, which every year they kind of renew that. And as they renew it every year, they give regulatory markets the opportunity to improve their methods of monitoring. And that means like you can have more ways that people can trade their carbon emissions. Obviously, we don't want to encourage people to just be like, you know what, I'll just buy carbon emissions from this place and do whatever I want. That's not the goal. That's why we have to set standards, and we're going to keep doing that over time. And it's also important, like, you know how you said they only get $10,000? Well, because the compliance markets are stricter, voluntary carbon markets are like the credits there are much cheaper. So you pay less to buy carbon in a voluntary carbon market, and they're all varied, than you would pay in a compliance market, because of like you're not dealing with like RED or NDCs or NAMAs, any of those stuff. You're just dealing with whatever this market has created. So there's a trade-off in that way using those different mechanisms. But again, like small projects and small communities of countries are going to lean towards the voluntary ones because that's what they can use. The hope is that as we advance, really, that these compliance markets can find a way to bring in more countries and be more accessible. Like we don't want to lose like the standards that are necessary to stop people from doing that thing where they just like, okay, I'm gonna build this building, I like donated some money. It has to be a little more than that, you know what I mean?
So the voluntary market is like the black market.
No, not the black market. I wouldn't call it that. They still have standards. But yes, it is catered. It's not big enough. Most voluntary markets, they're not big enough for like big companies and countries to be trading on, though. So at the end of the day, it is still keeping it small, which is, I guess, kind of good. That's everything that I could think of about blue carbon policy without us using up a lot of time, because you guys don't like to listen to long episodes, so we're trying to keep it short.
That would conclude our episode. Ala, before we finish, this carbon offsetting, right? Like, do you think, you've talked a lot about it, we've talked about the black market of it, we've talked the legal ways. Do you think it's a viable solution to the current climate crisis that we have? Like, can you just do that? Or do you think like we should really be pushing to cut down the GHGs instead of just like tossing them around?
So the thing about carbon offsets is like, yes, they can be dangerous because people do them in different ways, right? You have companies that'll be like, well, we are using electric vehicles, that's an offset. But the thing about a lot of blue carbon strategies and projects that are currently ongoing is I have some hope for them, because they are focusing on some serious sequestration, like enough that it would actually be an offset for one. It would actually reduce GHG emissions for real. And the projects don't just focus on like replanting. They also focus on conservation. And that conservation is technically cutting down on GHG emissions. Like you're cutting down less trees that are sinks and you're releasing less carbon. So in that way, I think it could be a solution. I mean, looking at it through this lens of blue carbon policy. But of course, we don't want the situation like we talked about in that IPCC report episode. We don't want the situation where like the offsets are just like empty offsets or trying to get to like that net zero. We need to push beyond just net zero balance at this point in the fight against climate change. That's just what I think.
I agree with you. And the same goes out to you guys. What do you guys think? Please let us know, because this is a hot topic. Everyone's talking about it. Now it's in pop culture, carbon credits and everything. So talk to us. Let us know what you think. The organization that we're going to talk about related to mangrove protection, Ala's already given you an introduction to it. It is the Mangroves for the Future. It is a unique partner-led initiative that was created to promote investment in coastal ecosystem conservation for a sustainable development. It is co-chaired by IUCN and UNDP, and it provides a platform for collaboration among the many different agencies like we've seen, and it provides different sectors and countries that are addressing these challenges for coastal ecosystem and livelihood issues. And that is our show. Next week, we will dive into the London fog and how one city's quest for cleaner air defined air quality policy in far-reaching areas.
You guys were finally going back to what you like, the doom and gloom, and then we bring you the positive at the end.
Yes, that's exactly what we do. Doom and gloom. That's our nickname. I mean, I'm probably doom and you're probably gloom.
Oh my God, yes.
For sure. Check out our website, planetpolicypals.com, for updates and show notes, as well as references on everything that we talked about today and any previous episodes. Email us, leave us a voicemail, rate and review us. If you have any updates on cool marine ecosystem policies and initiatives around you, please share them with us. We would love to find out. Follow us on Twitter at Planet Policy Pal, Instagram at Planet Policy Pals, and like our Facebook page. Check out our YouTube page if you need captions as you listen. Stay safe and happy as always, and until next time, keep learning, pals!